Hello, everybody. I believe we're giving everybody a second here to load in. That's where people lag behind. I do all the time. We'll see. All right. Okie doke. Instead of looking at this beauty, let's see if I can't get a PowerPoint or something up there to give you guys some context. I'm going to share screen over. Here. All right, now here's my guinea pig, Safi. Safi, can you guys see that okay? You speak for everybody else.
Yes, I can see it.
Sweet.
I think we're ready to go.
Yeah, this one's usually or a lot shorter than the ones we usually do. I want to thank everybody for joining me and for watching this maybe in the future too on the first of our new series of a deep dive. This one's a little bit different than what we typically do. We're just trying to mix it up, trying to do more helpful content in general. Today, we're talking specifically about how to make good onboarding, offboarding forms. So in relation to how these deep dives are going to work, because we're going to try to do these again, not just for this, but in general, we're going to be focusing kind of a deep cut on a specific subsection. So this is not as grandiose as a lot of the things we've tried before. We're not going to do like state of the industry. We're just focusing on specific aspects of it. So it is hosted by me. We're in a suit. No, not real life. So who am I to do this? I'd like to think the foremost CloudRadial expert, short of the people that develop it. I talked to a bunch of you guys, prospects in general. So I like to think I have a pretty good understanding of more or less what people need across various industries, different sizes, verticals and whatnot. I do the content creation a lot for fun. I'm kind of a tinkerer. So it's not just like, here's how I think you should do it. I know what it is. And I don't shed. That's good. I just thought I'd do a bald joke. See if that landed. We'll see. Can't hear you laugh. Hope you are. All right, next one. So today specifically, we're covering the best practices. So there's just some, very common question for people going like, what should I be putting in those forms? What are other people doing? I'll kind of show you some of those. How to make your forms actually look good so they don't scare people away, make them useful. So that's why I put UI UX. The token usage is going to be very helpful for those that are looking to do this at scale. We're going to talk about how to do it as a one-off. We're going to talk about how to do it for multiple people. The next question after that is one of the most common ones of all, which is variability. So in short, what that means is if I have an onboarding form, let's say, fine, right? Everybody feeds off the same onboarding form. That's really easy, but that's not really how real life works. For the most part, what happens with people is client to client, customer to customer. There's some variance in these types of forms. A good example is, I know I've talked to a lot of people with like Microsoft licenses. So you'll see that we'll kind of address the use case where client A might have 3 licenses to pick from, client B has 5, the client C has 2, and they're maybe different, right? So we're going to talk about, do you have to duplicate the form? How does that work? So we'll see how to address that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about routing and checklists for not so much within CloudRadial or your processes here, but your processes back in the PSA and how to streamline those. So nothing too crazy. I think obviously you can run with this concept really hard, but something else that I wanted to do as well is, again, this webinar, we're going to be talking about how to do it. You'll see me do it live, at least some couple examples. For you guys, I actually just spun these up like a minute ago. I already put the example versions of these in our community. So community.cloudradial.com. If you're not a part of that, please join. There's content in there. We try to drop stuff in here. So what you'll notice for those familiar with CloudRadial is, technically speaking, you can do onboard, offboard forms, not just in one ticketing section, but 2, right? We have 2 different ticketing sections. We have the service requests, which are going to be the more visual ones. That's the preferred way. Some people want to do those in problem reports, which is more text-based ticketing. I've created identical onboard, offboard forms in both sections, so you can pick whichever one you prefer. And those are the specific links. And those will be listed in the follow-up email. And as an aside, other thing to look out for, the thing I wanted to at least rep, is we have a product update webinar coming up next Thursday at 10 a.m. Central. And again, in that registration, or I'm sorry, the link to register to that is going to be in the same follow-up that will put the the links to the sample content that we'll talk about right now. All right, so try to keep it short. Nobody likes to watch a webinar or PowerPoint. That's boring. Let's talk about the actual product. So let's talk about what that looks like. All right, so I should be steering the screen of a tenant here. And this is just the generic one I've used in the past. This is our land, onboard, manage, grow tenant. I picked it because it's kind of an empty one. So for those, again, not terribly familiar with how CloudRadial works, what I was talking about earlier is, technically speaking, you've got two areas to do these onboard, offboard forms. Obviously, there's a lot of context that goes behind this webinar in general. You have to be kind of familiar with the fact that CloudRadial is a client portal. There's a lot of stuff to it, and it does a lot of actions. But one of those things that is, very popular is for tickets. So as we refer to these onboard, offboard forms, depending on how your setup is, generally speaking, you're going to find these forms where you can access them under support on the left here, and either under report a problem or request service. And what I mentioned earlier is these report a problems are traditionally more of, if you're thinking ITIL, like your incident reports, where you go text-based, right? Really fast for the user. You don't want them to have to struggle and figure out, is this the right place? Just my printer having problems, they hit the form based off of if you have the right, if PSA connected, or if you're using an email connection, this information is going to get sent over. Fine. Similar concept with the service requests. You can see that we have that split up here. Again, in our mind, this service request area is better suited for these things. Just from a quick methodology perspective, we like to do this just because it gives people more of, again, a casual, more like almost like a shopping experience, where most people use this section for onboard, offboard forms, provisioning new hardware, stuff like that. And again, it's just nice to have an area in the portal that is not just like a singular ticketing section. So on a technical level, these are identical. That's why I was saying before, I built two identical copies of the sample onboard, offboard forms. When you click on these, despite the fact that they look, more visual, it's the same form. The routing applies the same. The automations you can do are the same. So totally preferential. Okay, so with enough context set there, what I said before is I want to talk about how to build these guys, right? So for anyone on the call that has not attempted to build them or is just curious about it, we ship CloudRadial with these two onboard and offboard ones. And in my opinion, up until this call, they're a little bit too simple. Because again, we put a bunch of sample content in CloudRadial in general, and we hope that people will modify it and kind of make it their own. But again, a lot of people just want to know what the real deal is, not just what a sample is. So if you were to hit these onboard, offboard forms right now, the ones that you would see in your tenant to begin with, you're going to see that they're pretty simple, right? They're what's the name of the user, what's going to be their email, date required, blah, blah, blah. So what I was thinking, because again, this is what I've seen in real life, is how to make this as realistic as possible. And that kind of comes down to how we're going to build our flow of questions we need to ask. So for the most part, when I've talked to people, the stuff that you really need to ask is, certainly this is a part of it, right? What's going to be the new user's name, first name, last name, job title, department, office location. And as far as building that, here's how we're going to do it. So again, please forgive me, I know there's some context here. Ideally, you would want to do this within your partner content area, as this is the repository for all of your stuff that you would send out template wise, right? So this is like, you'd go down here, you've got a section of a folder of stuff that you could send out to one client or a multiple. Same thing for the service request is listed over here. This is where that initial sample content is coming from, how it knows to be populated to each company. But for the sake of simplicity today, I'll just be building them just here. I'll just do add. You'll have the same exact options and everything. This method I'm doing right here only applies to this one company. But let's take a look. So for the most part, a lot of the fields that you're going to see in these tickets are going to be pretty self-explanatory. There's going to be, first thing you're going to deal with in both problem reports and service requests is going to be the category. That's just to help people sort it. You can see over here that there's human resources. For onboard, offboard forms, typically that's the play. Certainly you can write your own. If you don't want to use one of the pre-existing ones, you can just type. It's not like you have to pick the drop-down ones, but I'll just keep it human resources, and I'll call mine new user. For the description, doesn't really matter too much. This is just to help the client understand. For something like a new user request form, it's pretty, the explanation I think is pretty innate. So we'll just say, new user request. You got a couple options here as far as, do you want to include the description in the ticket? Sometimes that annoys text because it can be, lengthy text that they don't really need to see. Feel free to use it. If you're generally speaking, if you're subject to the ticket itself, the name of it is descriptive enough, then this may be redundant. So I actually recommend turning that off. The short description, this is kind of also not too bad. That is just this little guy right here, the one that shows up inside of the card. So again, onboard, offboard, keep it super simple, new user request. It's okay to have these be the same. You'll see why in a moment. You can change the button. That also is not too bad. By default, every button starts with request. Feel free to play with that. You can do pricing on the service requests, which is something that I wouldn't imagine anybody wants to charge people to bring in new users, but if you wanted to, you'd certainly show a price on that. Change the iconography, change the color. So you kind of have some leeway there. As far as iconography goes, I keep it super simple. We do have a built-in icon library, especially for the service request. So as it pertains to new user onboard, offboarding, and you could search, but I'm a big fan of getting super simple. If you search user, one of the things that I constantly go to is we've got the add user and remove user. Those are my standbys. So I usually do, like, if I'm doing a new user request, I'll do an add user icon. Really easy for them to see. I get the unhappy face, but maybe a little aggressive, who knows. And then you've got this last option, which a lot of people miss, which is nice. The initial set of tickets that shows up right when they click on the request service is going to be the ones that are pinned. So a lot of times what happens with people is if they don't know this, they'll come to this screen and think that there's only 2 forms, or 5, or however many you have pinned already. The fact of the matter is that because we, again, don't know if you're going to have 1 form or 1,000, we only show the pinned ones. So that option is very helpful. Again, it is listed under here is item pinned, because if you don't have it, then basically the user has to select a category to find out where that ticket is. So kind of nice to have that available to flip over. So I prefer to pin, especially onboard, offboard forms. They're one of the more common ones for sure. Also, yes, these this recording is, or this webinar is recorded, so no worries. It'll have the link to rewatch for sure. Also, I talk fast, so they record me on purpose. Yeah. All right. So as we go through, like I was saying, keeping it super simple, right? We're going to just do a human resources. We're going to do a new user request, and we're going to, I'm lazy, so I'll just do tests. Icon is fine. This is the main point of this webinar in general, is what questions do you ask? What should we be asking? So again, earlier in the PowerPoint, I mentioned that there's kind of 2 main things. One is you definitely want to ask the questions you need, and they're probably going to be more intricate than the sample ones we have. But you also want to consider the UI UX, especially with an onboard offboard process. Those can be super lengthy, right? We know that the more information you guys have, the better it is to set it up. The more information you ask for, the scarier and more tedious it is for the user. And obviously, we're trying to encourage portal behavior. We don't want to shut them off. So one of the things that I don't see used enough that I think is really neat is you could build these questions out in general. So if you look at the anatomy of how these questions work, for the most part, there's a lot of form builders out there that are pretty similar. You've got the option to choose what type of questions you're asking. Is it a text-based one? Is it a phone one? Is it a multi-select option? And various things. I really recommend breaking them out into chunks. So you'll see what I mean here. So if I were to just hit this as is, right? We're just going to submit this ticket. Oh, and I should have pinned it. Oh, no, I did. Good. I listened to myself. It's here, right? New user, click on that. They fill it out. And you see what I mean, right? So here's all this stuff right here. And if you were to imagine that I were to keep adding to it, add question, and we just keep adding question, this is what I'm talking about, right? You might not have just 5 questions. You might have like 40. And that becomes really tedious for the client because they start seeing it like this. So they get fatigued, which is common. So what I'm suggesting instead, what I've seen work to great effect, is break up your requests of stuff with page breaks. And what that's going to do is, as you edit a ticket, right, as we build out your onboarding form, you're going to have the option to select one of the question types as not text or whatever, but as an actual page break. And it'll look different too. It'll look like this. So what this page break is going to do is it essentially is going to put like tabs at the top of the ticket. So you definitely want to put one at the beginning. And usually, especially since these are more like, general user questions, I might even say that, right? General user questions. And this is where you want to start going through and kind of figuring out what you need. So the very first question you ask is, user's full name. You can do a couple of tricks with a lot of these things. And again, these aren't necessarily super interesting for webinar's sake, but if you want to make sure that it's required, right? They can't submit the ticket without answering this question. If you want to make sure that the answer to this question comes in as the subject of the ticket, that's also a really good play, especially with usernames and stuff with the onboarding, because you have to imagine when the user submits this form, they fill it all out and hit it. Whoever's on the receiving end of that wants to be able to glance at the ticket that just came in and know what it is, right? If they just get a thing saying ticket submitted, I don't know that. But if they get new user, dash Jim Smith dash, starts tomorrow, then that's a lot more helpful. They can glance at that and know that that's good. So this subject button actually comes in pretty handy for that. So if we keep going, again, we might do a user full name. Certainly we might do like another one that I see very common. We'll do another text-based one here, is like a department. So it's like, hey, what department are they going to be a part of? The next one after that is going to be maybe something like, what's their job title? So you can see that I'm keeping it super simple. A lot of these should really just be freehand text fields. They're just going to be single line answers, this. By all means, if you want to get fancier, you certainly can. We're going to have the option to do stuff like your multi-choice drop downs and stuff like that. And that's nice because if you have a predefined set, again, you don't just leave them a text field, which looks like what this does. You can actually list choices, right? So it might be IT department or HR or whatever, right? So as you go through with that, could be good to have that general breakdown. So imagining this on and on and on, I could also go ahead and add another page break here. So let's say I've asked all of my questions and then I want to switch over to more of a access-based question set. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and switch to another page break, right? And then I'll do like account access info and repeat, right? So you can see that I'm compartmentalizing all of these things. The visual effect to this is going to be this. So when the user clicks on it, right? Whereas before it was like this, right? It's just a slew of questions. Now they're going to have them broken out like this. So what you're going to see is, again, it's a lot more palatable, right? You may be asking 40 questions, but at the very least, they're going to be easy to answer, and then you move on to the next one. So what's happening here, if you're noticing this, is this will also tell you how many required fields there are on there. Nothing you have to set. That's just if you mark a certain question as is required. The user has easy access to see like where they missed the thing. So if I forgot to answer this, I go, oh, my bad, Jim Smith. It goes, oh, okay, you answered the required one. You're good to go, as you go on and on. The other thing worth noting on these is that you can do conditional questions, which I want to briefly speak to in a moment. And conditional ones also are tremendously helpful for a form like this because they're how you can get super complex questions kind of presented to the client in a way that's not scary. So a lot of the ones, especially at the beginning where we're talking about name, department, whatever, you just answer that, cool. When it comes to stuff like maybe account access information or do they need certain things, right? That's where we're going to start asking questions that have follow-ups. So perhaps one of the ones that you might want to do is let's do a multi-choice with a drop-down option, right? Saying, does the user need VPN access, let's say, right? So easy enough, and the choices are going to be yes or no. Now, that's all well and good, but perhaps if they don't, whatever. If they do, tell me about what VPN we're using, hypothetically, right? So again, you don't want to just put that. So CloudRadial makes it pretty easy to set these conditional, they only show this if certain answers triggered. All you're going to do is the questions after the one that branches off, you just create them like usual, right? You can see that there's a new question button here. And as you create these new questions, you basically have the option to say, okay, in this case, like what VPN are we using? And what we're going to do is everything else applies the same way. There's a lot of self-explanatory here. To set conditionals, you're going to see this show more option button at the bottom of these forms. So what you can do is you can do show more options, hide until, right? This is your conditional. So right now, every question is set to be visible all the time. In this case, we don't want that, right? What VPN are we using should only trigger when this question equals yes. So that's what we can do. We can find the question, does the user need VPN access? Only show this one when the answer to the previous one equals yes. And when you set up a conditional, you're going to see that you're going to have a little hidden eyeball to show you that this question is not readily visible. So what that ends up looking like now is like this, right? Our basic questions, we go to the account access info, right? Does the user need VPN access? No, whatever. If they say yes, the next one triggers. So this is the general gist to literally all of it. And I know that this is only a 30-minute webinar, so obviously there's lots of stuff. And that's why I was saying the community stuff, the questions I added, the sample ones are really good because they're going to look like this, where I'm going to swap over and show you those. So here is what the big boy ones that I'm going to give you guys look like. So these are already pre-thought out. They have a lot more intricacy than the ones even I was just building as an example. And they're going to be good because you can, again, kind of retroactively fit them. So they're going to be this add new user form and this remove a user form. And when you look at them, I went ahead, kind of took some best practices, kind of built this to be very self-explanatory, right? You got your first name. I did sub descriptors to help users figure it out. Start date has a little calendar app to it too. This is the date field. And you can see that quite literally eating my own dog food here, as I just said, right? I have that set up with account access information, various access notes, right? Account details as a user need an email. So I think this, rather than me just sitting here explaining and copy this webinar, I figured it would be more helpful to you guys to give you the sample content that I built and have you kind of pick it apart and plug in your own stuff. So that's really all there is as far as building a ticket, right? That's why I was saying it potentially could be a black hole, potentially could be really simple. Some of you guys might not need all these questions. It might be something you don't necessarily need to spend a jillion hours with. So you have that. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I think is probably the most requested thing is, okay, cool. In a real life scenario, what would happen and what's happening here in this tenant is you would build this form in your content area, right? Your template library. So when we go down to the very bottom, in this case, in this other tenant I do have those listed right here in their own package, their own content package, onboard, offboard forms. So this is what I was saying before. Earlier, I was building them locally by clicking add, and I would have applied that form just to that one company. Building them from content gives you the flexibility to give them to multiple companies, but it's the same steps, right? You can see that it's quite literally the same form builder I was doing before. What I wanted to mention and talk about is tokens and why these are super, super important. So inevitably what happens is you build this form, you feel really good about the generic form, you think this is going to fit most people's needs, but you hit that roadblock where all of a sudden you're like, okay, we need to know the first name, last name, whatever. But maybe one of the questions you ask under account access, for example, is, or maybe did I do it under account details? I can't remember. Let's see where I put that thing. Oh, here we go. Software applications required, right? Okay. Generally speaking, you might give them the choice of, do you need Adobe, do you need Office, do you need WinZip, or something else? Now, knowing your clients, you might already know that there are specific line of business apps that apply to them. So you're left with this kind of weird scenario where you're like, okay, I like my generic. Do I have to copy and paste and do some stuff, blah, 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 for individual stuff? And this is where it gets a little bit complex, so bear with. But generally speaking, what you're going to want to do is, if you want to generate something that is unique to an individual company, you basically need to put, like, for lack of a better term, they're basically like holes in your tickets that you can plug in variable stuff. And in our case, those holes are going to be tokens. So here's what I'm going to do, just to show you an example of how this works. I have this form currently, right? I will currently push this out to all of my companies. We'll go ahead and do that really quickly. So say everybody gets the same form. Okay, cool. That's been pushed out. Now, I need to have this software be variable, right? Software applications be variable. So instead of giving them a set of questions and giving them responses, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the type, not do an actual question, but I'm going to put a call for a template. What this is telling CloudRadial is saying, hey, this one is no longer going to be relevant because it is conditional upon the question I just removed. Putting this template is basically telling CloudRadial, hey, you're looking for something to plug this hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify this by token. This is an extremely advanced thing for CloudRadial. So again, I'm cognizant of the fact that with 5 minutes left on the webinar, we're not going to cover all of it, but I want to show you what you can do with this and what a lot of people do to keep things kind of scalable. So this template specification is essentially asking me, what should I plug in here? And in this case, we're going to start our templates, our tokens, always with an @ sign. That's how it's going to know to call to this templated tokenized questions. And I'm going to put, at software list. This makes as much sense to CloudRadial as it does to anyone who doesn't know this either. CloudRadial has no idea what I'm talking about. It's just seeing that show this question, and then plug in at software list, whatever that means, right? So that's cool. That's actually what I want. So what is essentially going to happen now is CloudRadial is going to realize or going to see that it should be serving up all of these questions to everybody. But when it hits this at software list, it's going to have no idea what I'm talking about, just zero clue. As a result of that, it's going to be blank. So CloudRadial is going to show model new user account. It's going to do access notes. When it hits this question, it's just going to ignore it. It's just going to skip right to company file access. And that's actually what we want. Because in that scenario, right, as we go to like request service, let's see, add new user. We're going to go to the account access information. There's no software, right? It should be here. We want to make it so if I have a custom software list for one client, show that. If I have it for another client, show that. If I don't have it at all, don't show it at all. And that's what it's currently doing. It's going, I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm not going to show anything. So how do we get the appropriate stuff for individual companies to show here? What we need to do is we need to build a token or question template. So here's how that works. We're going to go down to your partner dropdown, right? This is the control panel for CloudRadial. And we're going to go to settings on the bottom here. And as we go to settings, there's going to be a section under the configuration side over here for these question templates, a little thing like here. So as we go through these, you're going to have a couple of stock ones that are here, which we can kind of ignore that for today's conversation. And all we want to do is we want to build a template of questions for specific companies. This is where you're plugging in specific company variants. So in this case, this fictitious company I'm working on is Bootcamp July. So I might call this software list dash Bootcamp July. Now the name doesn't really matter here. So my best practice is make it super apparent what you're doing. You're building just a set of questions that only apply to this one company, and you're making the name of it really easy to understand. I know that there's going to be a software list of questions for the Bootcamp July company. And then I can add my questions, kind of like I can build a form. So this is going to be our variable things we can plug and chug into forms without having them be a part of the form themselves. That's kind of the trick to how you can get that variability and not have to duplicate forms over and over again. So in this case, I would probably do a multi-choice drop down, right? I would do, as you know, we're kind of imagining if this question was actually in the form. So I'd say software options, there we go. You know, we'll say for sake of time, 1, 2, 3, whatever. So there we go. So now I've got just a free floating question that needs to be plugged into a form. So that we've got two pieces of the puzzle solved. The form has a hole that calls for software list. I now have a standalone software list, and I need to somehow tell CloudRadial that Bootcamp July gets this plugged into their form. Repeat this process with pretty much anything, right? If you were to do this again for another client, the easiest way is to take somebody's form that you already have, copy it. You have a little copy button on these question templates, and maybe this time it's a software list for another company, Assurative. And in this case, Assurative doesn't have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have, I don't know, let's do A, B, C, and D. Cool. So what does that get me now, right? Again, the form is done. I don't really have to mess with that anymore. The questions exist now. I just need to match them. So this is where I was saying it gets a little tricky, but it's good to know. So let's do this. Let me open up another Bootcamp admin thing. So remember that the form I just built inside of the onboard offboard forms, again, is standard. This is like literally any form builder you've ever seen in the world works this way. I ask questions, that's it. But we've done this, right? We built a hole saying, hey, call at software list. So what I need to do is I need to remember this name and basically tell CloudRadial that, hey, when Bootcamp July sees the at software list, it needs to plug in this question right here. When Assurative, another company, sees it, they need to plug in this set of questions. So that's how I'm going to build myself that little tunnel holes that plug in questions. So this is done. The question is done. The form is good. This is the last step. When I go to my client list, right? So you can see that in this overall CloudRadial tenant, I have 4 clients. I want to go to Bootcamp July specifically here, and I want to tell it, it's like, hey, here's your company. There's a spot for specific tokens for you. And this is basically you telling CloudRadial, I need you to read these specifically, just you. So when I go in here, I'm going to add a token. I'm going to add, when you see at software list, right, which is what it's going to see in that form, I need you to plug in this case, it was, I think it was 385, but I don't want to mess it up. Yeah, I need you to plug in 385. So this number is really what's important. That's why you saw the name doesn't matter. This doesn't really matter. It's just about this number. So in short, what I'm saying is when you see that form and you see that thing, you're going to plug in 835, right? It's going to know. Assurative, same idea. Assurative, you're going to see that same form. You're going to see the onboarding form, but you're not going to know what the hell software list means. So when you see at software list, you're going to plug in your question template, which is 386. So this is the tricky part about getting this nailed down. And that's why I wanted to have this webinar in the first place about these onboard offboard forms, because this right here is by far the majority of what people struggle with, which is how do you keep things scalable in a way that, it's like we obviously have a generic, but people are going to deviate from that without needing to just make a mess of all this stuff. And while this is a couple of steps, this really ends up helping out. So the end result of this is you don't have to publish or do anything. You've got the main form going out there, right? You've got your onboard, offboard forms, plugging and chugging, cool. You've built yourself a hole like we did with at software list using that template to plug in variable questions, cool. We've built the variable questions, right? They're stupid, but they're there. So that's step 3. And then step 4 is I've told CloudRadial, when you see this question, you plug in this. When you see this question, you plug in this. The end result of this is going to look something like this. When I go into Assurative, right, we're going to pretend like we're a person in that company. They will not know the difference. When they go to support and request service and they go to add a new user, they're going to run along it. You can see all of this stuff is the same, part of the template. When they go to account access information and they go to software options, they're going to get served A, B, C, and the D that I got cut off. Fine. When Bootcamp July goes to it, right, again, they're going to get served that same form. But when it comes to that other thing, CloudRadial is going to plug in their specific options, right? So for the most part, you don't need to do this obviously every single day or all the time. This is really necessary for especially like stuff that I've seen with like license allocations, license counts, all that kind of stuff, where it's like, what licenses do you need? Client A might need 2 different types. Client B has the choice of 6, and so on and so forth. So when you look at both the add user and remove user, the remove user is also part of the sample pack that I'm giving you guys. Similar concept, right? You're going to see a lot of these basically in reverse. I didn't talk about the questions I asked here because, again, I think the best way for anyone watching this webinar to learn is just to take the sample stuff and reverse engineer it, because it already has all the logic built in. But same concept applies, right? You now have a way to say, I have a better starting point. I have a way to plug in stuff. There is a supplementary thing in our academy if anyone is interested. You don't necessarily need to do that, but I think it's helpful. If you haven't joined, academy.cloudradio.com is the free training you get with CloudRadial anyways, as far as structured training. And in here in the dashboard, you're going to go here, and there's basically a section under the ticketing aspect of it, right? So there's all the things on how to use CloudRadial in general. Specifically, obviously, we're talking about ticketing for this webinar. And even more specifically, the one I'm talking about right now is this one. It's using tokens and advanced question templates. So that is a slowed down version of what I'm talking about right now, which is how to plug in those variable token questions. Okay, so again, I know a lot of information covered. The last brief bit, I know I'm over already, is just on routing and checklists, and that's not too difficult of a concept. The idea is that when you build these forms, right? So let's say we've obviously got the ability to do something super simple, a couple questions, a couple page breaks, looks nice. We've got the ability to plug in variances using those question templates. And then the last thing that people do is once they have this all dialed in, really all the maintenance that's required on this is you might want to tweak the general questions that everybody gets. If you need to tweak like the software list for one company, you would do that from the question templates. So you don't really mess with the form at all pretty much after the first creation of it. The last thing to do is to understand how it can be routed for your own efficiencies. So we've got all the questions listed. We've got the confirmation page. This can be extremely helpful. Ordinarily, if you don't fill it out, when the user hits the ticket, they're going to submit it. That's it. Confirmation is nice is if you have a follow-up step, right? If maybe it's a new user and they also need to go to, a certain website and do a thing, or you need them to fill out another form, you might want to let them know that in the confirmation, because this will pop up right as soon as they hit submit. It can be very, very simple. Like you literally have a message saying, thank you, that's it. If you want to link them to another form, currently in CloudRadial, there's not a way to like daisy chain forms together. So what you would want to do probably is if you identify a specific form. So let's say, need a new laptop too. Did you just do a new user one? Do you want to order one? I've got, you guys as well have some sample ordering stuff in CloudRadial. Remember that with any piece of content, whether it's a course in our university, whether it's a ticket like we're talking about now, any one of those guys, you can click on these things. And if you edit them, or if you do it from content directly, you're going to see the option for a permalink, which means that you can give people links to specific stuff. So as it relates to these confirmation messages, one of the, again, simplest ways is thank you, we'll take care of it, whatever, or nothing at all. Or please be sure to fill out the follow-up form. Here's the form you need to fill out. And when they click on it, inevitably, they're going to get taken to that form specifically. So these permalinks potentially helpful. So not too much science here. It's just, if you can grab a link to it, you can put it in there and that's cool. But the last thing I'll talk about here is the routing and checklist. Now, again, routing is highly variable depending on what connections you have. If it's just an email, if it's going to be PSA based, so you have a lot of options as far as to what board or queue with status and blah, blah, blah. That's fairly self-explanatory. It's based off what you already have existing. What I wanted to talk about specifically is the checklist, because I see that happen a lot. So your onboard, offboard ones may go to specific areas of the school. The checklist functionality, though, is more unique, I think. So a lot of times people have specific steps they have to take care of with the onboarding one. And if you want the technicians to know that, and it comes in with a ticket without having additional scopes of work generated or however you keep track of that, this is handy, right? So basically you can break this down. So maybe you literally have that be create new user in Office, and then maybe the next line is create new user in PSA, and so on and so forth, right? So creating this checklist now, you would do it once at the ticket level, right? You would, aside from just all the form stuff you have. And then this is a nice way to kind of wrap this all up. So essentially what happens is you've got the perfect set of automation here. You've got the questions you need. It looks nice. It's easy to fill out. The conditions hide the complex stuff. If you have follow-up steps, you can set them. If you don't need to. The routing by default will work. It'll just go to whatever you've defined as your default board or queue. So you can always customize that and override it, or you leave it as is. And then the checklist is going to help you keep your processes consistent. So from the technician side, on their side, they're going to get the ticket with all the information and the steps on how to address it. So that's really all there is to onboard, offboard forms. Like I said, there can be a lot more, there can be a lot less, but I wanted to give this overview because, again, specifically as those token variabilities happen, we're seeing more and more people have the need to manage this at scale. And I think as long as you've got something to play with and something to work with, then you're going to be in a much better shape than just like, figure it out. You can do it. So I figured we should do this. All right. I know I already went 10 minutes over, which I was wondering if I could do in 30 minutes. I can't. But Safi, what do you think? Should I be answering any questions?
I've got a couple of questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I'm going to run through them real quick. You may have addressed some of these, but yeah. Jason Bristow wanted to know, is there a way to preview changes?
There's not. So
okay.
When you do content, yeah, this is just a tip because I have that same problem, especially when you build really lengthy forms. A lot of people don't want to build a behemoth and go, hope it's good, publish, and then wait for it to publish, wait, check the stuff. If you're going to do it that way, one of the things that I do is I'll just build a form for one client, maybe for yourself, right? You just build it as is, because this is essentially your preview mode. When you hit this, there's nothing to publish. It just immediately creates it. Then what you can do is if you're happy with it and you find like, this is good, when you click on your form, you can actually save it back to content. So rather than creating a content, pushing it down, you create it locally, push it back to content, and then distribute. That serves as a preview function. So you can see here that I could theoretically save this form back to any one of my other ones. So that's the closest you can get to preview right now.
Okay, so Damian Clark, can you hide or show sections or fields based on selections and other fields?
Yes, that's the conditional ones I mentioned.
Yeah, that's the conditional logic. Okay, sure. And then back to Jason, can we have multiple conditions added to a product?
I believe it's only one per set. You can have multiple conditions based off of like, if you did the example I said before, VPN, yes or no, you would just create different questions. So it's like, if yes, then show this question. If yes to this question, again, show this one. But you can't have like and or. You basically have like show this question if it equals yes. And then if you have multiple things, actually, I think I do that in the one of the sample ones here. If you look on add new users, I believe, or is it offboard? I can't remember, maybe not. But generally speaking, the answer is yes. You can have multiple things be triggered from there, like this. Yeah, here's what I was talking about. Revoke computer access has 3 separate questions that are triggering from there. So while it's not a multi-condition thing, it's basically like you can keep stacking questions and keep making them dependent on one answer. So 3 of them are triggering from one click right now. Maybe
Okay,
that's not the exact answer, but yeah.
kind of following with that is, can you hide or show questions or sections based on the client? For, example, some clients use Adobe software, some don't. Some
That would
require
be
Zoom license,
that's the toughest part of all of this. So whenever you hit those types of discussions, you're basically, the majority of your brain power should go into really trying to boil down what is inarguably the most generic form. Like everybody's going to be asked to name everybody this. Anytime you sniff out an area where it could deviate, that's where I would say, hey, go ahead and build yourself that token hole like I did, because that way what happens is you can create a generic. I know I didn't mention this, I'll mention this briefly. So instead of having this be company specific, like every company has to have their own unique software list, what you could do is you could create a general one under question templates. So it's not related to software list, Azure, or whatever. And then what'll happen is, if that general one exists, CloudRadial will always plug in that one unless you specifically override it with another one. So in my example that I gave, I know technicalities, I didn't have that. I basically had a blank hole. CloudRadial didn't know. If it had a special one, cool. If you build a generic one, then that'll work. That would be just at software list here.
Okay, and then I had this come up with you yesterday, which you helped me with, but if somebody fills in a form for a new user request and then clicks the button that says that they want like a new computer, can it trigger the second form to order the laptop and then join the forms together?
No, so it can't merge them, but what you can do is you can get clever on how you make that work. Because for example, if you have that happening, right, let's say that's that exact example, you have the section for equipment. Does the user need to be using an existing or new computer or whatever? The best thing that we can do right now is we can say, okay, using that permalink, you can make this conditional, right? If they say yes, then it goes, okay, perfect. Here's the new form to click, and then it opens a new tab to that form, right? Or you can say, okay, cool. The confirmation message at the end is going to show you the form you need to click. So I can't directly link them. It's still kind of manual, but you can somewhat do that, yeah.
And then this is anonymous. You didn't put your name. Is there anything we can do when building a service request ticket or any other content that controls the formatting and display of the text when they receive it in the PSA?
I've had that happen too, where it's like, I know that when it goes in the PSA, it's very like line by line based. As far as I know, no. I think that's like just how the API takes the controls. It like literally just goes, all we have control over is like line colon answer, which I know a lot of people are like, can you bold it? Can you do this? We looked into that. I don't think the API supports it.
Yeah, I've got it from my Mr. Anonymous, put in, he's an Autotask user, and then right up behind him, Felipe Hamill said the same thing, but about ConnectWise Manage.
Yeah, I think again, because last time, because we've had that happen before, people are like, can we make it easier to see, or can you do this? I think like our literal abilities are line break. That's it. I don't think we can bold or make it any, because I think, yeah, we've had that happen where people are like, can we make it easier to see? It's like, no, kind of, maybe.
I think that's something inside the, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, we should ask the developers again to relook at it, because I've had that happen a lot for those struggling with that. I know that sometimes the way that comes in, especially if it's a lot of data, it's hard to like pick it through. So I'll look into that.
And so, and then Anonymous wants to know, is page break equivalent to a line break? That's
not well for the ticket. Actually, I haven't looked into that. If it's like, if in the PSA itself, it's like a line break of it. I know that you don't have an option to list page break as in the PSA. So when you go page break, where are we at? There it is. Yeah, it doesn't even show as like showing the PSA or not. I would have to try that. I don't know if you want to try that.
Yeah, I have to kind of play with that. So. I mean, I think I've got, anybody have anything else before we adjourn?
I'll make a note to not make it half an hour, because I know I cannot keep it to half an hour, but for the most part, thank you guys for sticking with us.
And we're also going to send you a recording. So if you, if it's a lot of information that was covered today. So we'll send, send out the recording. Do have a couple more questions coming in. can you have a new user or remove user to be approved by someone, supervisor,
You certainly can.
before coming to IT? That's part of the managed services piece.
Certainly, yeah. Whenever you look at the routing of it, obviously you have two main choices in CloudRadial. You either have the choice, especially when you look at like content, how we distribute stuff. You either have the option of taking that thing, right? So in this case, here's my onboard offboard folder that contains my 2 forms. And on the right-hand side here, this is what governs the audience that can see it. So this column over here tells you what companies can see it. In this case, I just blasted it to everyone. And then over here, it's the level of user. So in this case, that would certainly be a use case because I have the onboard offboard forms going to everybody. Now, if you want to just not even deal with that, what I would do is I would just make that published to admin only, because that way you don't have everyone being able to, request an onboarding of a new person. But should you want to keep that enabled for specific people and they need approval if they're not that specific person, as you build the onboard form and you go to the routing. So I know I talked really fast about like you send it wherever. There's going to be a button for administrator approval trigger. So you can either leave it blank and it'll send the approval to anybody who's listed as admin within the system, send them an email and everything too. Or you can specifically specify. So if I needed Safi@cloudradial.com to approve this new user one, you can do that too.
And then also just to remind you again, because I've gotten this question several times, Ricky, his samples that he did today are in the community.
Yeah, so I'll show that too
yeah.
really quickly, because I knew that doing this, obviously, I wasn't going to be able to build literally the entire ticket because that took me like an hour even before this. So what I did is in the community, I've done 2 different versions of them, right? So you've got your service request ones, which is what I recommend doing for most people. So if we go to this link over here, let me copy that. Oops. It's going to take you to the community, to the specific post I just put up. So it's going to be like, hey, here's the zip file. That's how they come in, and it'll show you how to import it. And then similarly, I did one for the problem reports because some people, like I said before, want to use the problem reports for their onboard offboard. So my gut feel is most people are going to do service requests, but certainly you can go in there. So once you put those in the portal, you're going to have exactly what I was showing in this bootcamp tenant. You're going to have them here and here, and you can play with them. Like I said, retroactively work with them, chop them up, put in your own stuff and play with the templates and whatnot. So definitely going to be a head start rather than just having to remake it yourself.
And then to end us today, Felicia King, who we just adore, has said just to go ahead and make it an hour in the future so that we can handle the material and the questions. And I think she's absolutely right. So
well, I started off my own thing going like cheeky 30-minute. And then like when I thought about the token stuff, I was like, shit. All right, let's talk about that.
Okay, don't say that. What'd I tell you?
Shoot. Yeah, nobody in IT swears, guys. Write that down.
We're not supposed to.
Nobody swears in IT.
Okay, so I think that's it. So, I mean, thank you very much for doing this, Ricky. As always, you're wonderful. And it's good information. I always learn something. So
yeah, and if anybody runs into any struggles, feel free to beat on support people, support@cloudradial.com, because we're here to help. So if you run into any snags, you want to double check on your stuff, just let us know. We'll take a look and we'll see what's up.
All right. Thanks,
cool.
y'all.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for my half-hour webinar.
Plus some.
All right. Later, guys.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.